Hi, Chanel. Welcome. Chanel, when you can, let me know in the chat. I will also say hi in the chat. Let me know in the chat the answers to a couple questions. Where are you? I'll put them up on the screen as folks trickle in. And then we'll get started, but I'll give everyone a couple of minutes to arrive and settle in. Hi, Gargi or Gargi. I'm not sure if it's a soft G or hard G. Hi, Teresa. Houston, yay! My mom's from Houston. It's a great city. Hey. Yay. So I am super excited. We're gonna probably have a small group. We tend to have small groups at these. And so I have been running them as open question and answer sessions. So my goal today is to figure out what are all of your most urgent GRE questions, and can I answer them all in the next hour? And so to start, say hi, let us know where you are, and then what do you want to see covered tonight? And I will do my best to improvise a lesson that knits together all of the things that people want. My guess is we'll have a range of different sort of levels of GRE exposure and different interests, and I'm going to try to do my best to get them all covered. And so far we have a very small group, so you might get to ask a lot of questions. Hi, yay, Iowa. I am also a fiction writer, and Iowa features very prominently in the fiction writing world. I have a lot of friends who went to school in Iowa. Very cool. That's one of the things I like about being online. We all get to be in different places. Yay! Oh, awesome, Chanel. Great. I'm super excited that you are just starting, and hopefully I can give you at least one or two tips today that will help you get started on a good foot. I'm glad you're excited to begin. Oh, and then the other thing that I think would be really helpful to know too is sort of what is your ideal timeline? Like, when do you want to be done? So where are you? And then when do you want to be done? Yay. Hi, Mariah. Hi, Anoop. So good to have you both here. Welcome. This is our GRE free prep hour. I run these as open Q&A sessions. So I was just telling everyone, your first and main task today is to say hi in the chat, answer these questions, and most importantly, let me know, what do you want to see covered tonight? So as everyone is answering these questions, I'll just say hello quickly. I'm Kat. I've been here at Manhattan Prep since 2015. So I've been doing GRE for 9 years. My new joke is that I have spent 9 years thinking about the GRE on a near daily basis so that you don't have to. Hopefully I can save you time. Hey, Arthur. Hey, Austin. Welcome everyone who's just coming in. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. And then most importantly, please let me know what you want to see covered in tonight's session. I can't guarantee that I can do everything, but I can usually do like 90% of what is asked for, and I will do my best to do 100%. Yay. Good. Mariah, good luck. That's so exciting. You are almost done. Most important thing you can do in the next couple of days is rest. I'm going to tell a little story about that. Just my camera. I had a student a few years back who saw like a crazy jump between her most recent, normally people's official test scores are relatively in line with their most recent practice test score. I think with the new test, there's, that's a great topic, how to be faster in quant. I think with the new test scores are a little more volatile, right? But it's unusual to see someone score on their official test like 4, 5, 6 points higher than they do on their most recent practice test. So she got that result, was really thrilled, let me know about it, and I was so excited for her, and I was so curious. I was like, how did you do this, right? I want to be able to tell I always ask my students who get the results they want, what they feel most helped them so I can pass it on. And she said that she took it the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and that she felt she had been successful because she had spent that week before her official test eating, sleeping, seeing friends and family, you know, for those of us who have families and it's relaxing to be around. And she was just in a really good mood when she went in. And so that's, you know, she credited that with seeing this huge jump. So I say this to reinforce the deep truth that one of the best things you can do between now and Saturday for you, Mariah, or for anyone in the last few days or week before their official test is to get a lot of rest. And that is a good thing to prioritize. And then throughout tonight, I'm going to try to think of little tips that you might want to have in mind as you're taking the test as we go through our process. So right now, what are our requests? How to be faster in quant. Oh, we have a few Texas folks. Nice. I have an aunt I have a lot of family in Texas. I have an aunt in Dallas. Cool. So a general overview, I think that's great. And that might also be a nice opportunity for some reminders about timing and timing strategy. Yes, and we have GRE versus GMAT. I think switching to GRE can be very clever, and I've had a bunch of students in the last couple of years who've come from GMAT to GRE. A lot of you know, a lot of the stuff that you've probably learned for GMAT, like a lot of the quant content, some of the reading club strategy, it's going to transfer to GRE. There'll be some new things to learn, of course, but I think you might have a shorter preparation horizon for GRE than you might for you know, the GMAT work you've done will transfer. It'll give you a good foundation, and then I think there's a bunch of things that make the GRE easier to deal with. That's why I teach GRE and not GMAT. I find GMAT a lot harder. I don't think it's true for everyone, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So GRE overview, GRE versus GMAT. Studying full time. Ooh, that's a treat. That's nice that you have that option. I have a current student who's in that situation too. Yay. Great. Oh, we have a lot of people just starting out. Nice. I like it. So tips for starting out is a good one. And let's see. Faster with data interpretation and QC. Oh, that's great. So maybe we'll do sort of faster in quant and fast with a specific focus on data interpretation and quantitative comparison. Awesome. I'm also in New York City. I'm in Brooklyn. I'm from Boston, but I've been in New York for nearly a decade now. Cool. So I think I've heard from everyone now. Here's what I think we're going to do tonight based on all of your lovely requests. We're going to start with a general overview of the GRE, just what it is, what to expect, what are the different question types, you know, overall structure, question types. Then we are going to talk about studying plans and tips if you are just starting. And if you are studying full-time. And I'll try to lay out a couple of good plans for that. And then we are going to talk about how to get faster, and probably with a focus on QC and DI. So we will, in the last segment, I think the first couple of segments will be a little bit more like lecture-y. Then we'll do some problems toward the end when we talk about how to get faster. I'll think a little bit about some good problems for that. And that'll probably be our hour. Along the way, right, we have a small group. I get sick of, you know, I get sick of too much of me talking. So please, at any point, interrupt, put questions in the chat, interrupt me, ask me to repeat, clarify, anything, right? It's going to be a little bit of me talking, but I would love to be responsive to you. Yeah, I think, we have one new person, Micah. You missed the intro. The theme of today's class is me answering as many of your questions and requests as I can. So when you get a chance, Micah, say hi in the chat. Let me know where you are in your GRE process, and what you might want to see out of tonight's session. Up here on the screen is our current plan for tonight. So let's start. I'll need maybe 30 seconds to grab the slides that I want, and then we are going to start with an overview of the GRE, because we have a lot of folks who are just starting out today. That's exciting. All right. Mhm. And of course, it is taking me longer than I thought to find the things that I wanted, but I will find them. We will get there. Here we go. All right. So the GRE. And I almost forgot. I have to add one thing to our plan before I forget. We are going to talk also about GRE versus GMAT. That's going to be an important lens for our overview as well, for folks who are transitioning or thinking about transitioning from one to the other. The GRE, what is it? It's a weird formatting issue on that slide. Hang on a sec. This is not the deck that I want either. I'm just gonna make my own slide for this. That's fine. I know how it works. I'm not gonna make you wait for me to find the slide. I don't know why I can't find it. All right. Actually, I'm gonna do it by hand. Oh, nice. You're coming back. Well, I have good news for you, Micah. Here's my good news. The GRE is now shorter. That's where we're going to start today. So what is the GRE? The GRE is only 2.5 hours long now. It starts with the essay. The essay is 30 minutes. You type in a really simple box. There is like no advanced features here. There's no grammar or spell check, right? So one of the issues with the essay is that if you, like me, have become a really weird speller over the many years of predictive text and things like that, you do want to be a little clean about that. So this essay is what, if anyone dealt with the longer GRE, there used to be two. The essay that remains is what used to be called the issue essay. The essay gives you a very simple prompt that you must agree or disagree with. You want to write 4 paragraphs, very standard 4-paragraph, intro, conclusion, 2 body paragraphs, and you want to support your case with concrete examples. By concrete, it can be anything that's just basically anything that's not a hypothetical, right? Book, personal experience, things you've read, things you've studied, current events, historical events, etc. And the goal here is really just get through it. I think we have a lot of folks applying to MBAs. If you're applying, pretty much anything except for a PhD in the humanities, you really want to get, a 4 and above on the essay, especially for business school. This is about 40% or more of test takers. Really, the goal here is comfort and confidence, not achieving anything that is beautiful. If you came through an American high school and or university setting, you have probably done some type of timed writing like this, whether it's the SAT, ACT essay, things you've done in school, things for state standardized tests, things like that. This is probably a familiar task. If you are coming from high school, higher education, somewhere that's not the United States, you may want to practice a little more, depending on how much of this type of thing you did, or if you've done SAT, ACT. But for most people, the essay, I would say maybe like at most, 5 to 10% of your overall study time should be spent on the essay. And I think it is fine to wait until, like week 6 to 8 of the process to begin the essay. So the essay is often a thing that comes later. That's mostly, I'm not going to talk more about it because I didn't get any questions about it. It's not super important. Those are the basics of the essay. The most important thing about the essay is that it is first, right? So that's why I'm like, do enough that you feel comfortable and confident with it, but don't shoot too much. So it starts with the essay. Once you have done the essay, you will then see a sequence of 4 sections. It will start with quant or verbal, and then you will get the other one. So you'll see quant, verbal, or verbal, quant. This is where the GRE is different. GMAT allows you to pick where you start, but GRE does not. You might get quant first, you might get verbal first, you don't know, then you'll get the other one. These sections will both have 12 questions in them. And I will show you what the structure of what these sections are going to look like in great detail in a few minutes. I'll go through the quant section structures. I'll go through, I'm going to go through all of this in a lot of detail, but this is just the broad outline. Then you will do another quant or verbal, and then the other one. And these are going to be 15 questions. So one thing that I found really challenging when I took the test last fall, the test is now much shorter, right? The overall experience is about 2 hours if you have standard timing, more if you have extended time, of course. But what I found difficult was that going from the short to the long, even though the overall test was shorter, there's something about having a slightly longer second section that I just needed to like dig a little deeper in terms of fatigue. So one thing to think about, just a good framework as you prepare. Folks asked about how to get faster, right? But as you prepare, I always counsel people to think about efficiency in using resources. And those resources are not just time. They are time, but they are also energy, and they are also attention. So as I practice from the very beginning, I am looking to do things in a way that is fast, but also easeful. I don't want to be thinking, I always sort of started this joke a few years ago. I was like, I'm good at GRE because I'm lazy, right? Like when I go into this, I'm not like, oh, I want to achieve. I'm like, I want to get through this. as easily as possible and never have to take it again, right? Those are the things that I think, back originally when I started doing this motivated me in this test. And so we're always balancing as we look for solutions, like what's fast, but then also what's not stressful for one's brain. And that'll be a little different for each person, right? The ideal strategy is a little different for each person. So this is the overall overview of the test. I'm sorry that I could not find this slide. Such a basic set of slides that I haven't been teaching full courses recently. Last thing that I want to say about scoring, and then I'm going to start getting into more granular things about quant sections, but about scoring, the test adapts. So let's say you, in the first quant section, the 12 questions, you're going to get a mix of easy, medium, and hard. And everyone's going to see the same section. Your performance on this, and within this section, you can move around, but your performance on this section is going to determine, in that next section, are you going to see, in that 15 question section, are you going to see more hard, more moderate, or more easy? It's not that like the hardest problem gets harder necessarily. It's that there's just more of them. There's a higher proportion of them. And then the way this works in terms of scoring is that the first section sets a range, sets a floor and a ceiling for your score. And then the second section is going to pinpoint that score within range. ETS doesn't tell us, exactly how many you have, exactly how many levels there are, exactly how many you have to get right. It will change a little bit, right? This test is scaled, so depending on how people tend to do on it that day, it'll vary. If you get a hard test on a given day, you may be able to get a few wrong and get a like 168, but on a different day, maybe you can get one wrong and get a 168. So I can't tell you exactly how many questions you need to get wrong or right to find your score within these levels. But this is the rough idea of how it works. And so one thing to keep in mind for folks who are starting out, right, is that improvement is seldom linear. These are maybe the two most important things. They're not maybe the best piece of news, but maybe two of the most important things I can tell you, especially if you're new. Improvement is not linear. What I tend to see in student progress is something that looks more like this, where there's a period of sort of plateau and skill building, followed by a like leap of integration. And all those skills and knowledge someone's been acquiring kind of click and settle in, and they see a big jump in score. So you may see a couple practice tests that stay stable. You may see a few that stay stable in score before you see that jump. One of the reasons that this happens is this is just how learning works for many of us. This is my experience of how learning works for me. And I see this reflected in many of the students that I've worked with over the years, where and I bet many of you have had this feeling, where you just have to struggle with something for a while before breakthrough. So part of it's just a normal part of the learning process. And the other reason is the test gets harder as you get better. That's your reward, right? For getting better at the test, you get to deal with more hard problems. So just to sort of set expectations. And then the other expectation that I want to, manage is it's not always a 3-month process. In fact, I think it's often not a 3-month process. So I was just talking about this with someone where I think there's a lot of people on Reddit who are like, I had done it in 20 days. And that's totally doable. And I totally believe that there are people that works for, but I see a lot of like 6 to 8 months plus processes. So I say this not to discourage. If you don't have 6 to 8 months, you can work with the timeline you have, right? I say this not to throw water on anyone, but just to emphasize that if you spend a couple of months and you're still not where you want to be, don't give up. I think this is maybe the most important thing I can say today. This is a learnable skill. Depending on, your past experience with these tests, your past experience with math, your relationship with reading and writing, your language, your languages, there's all different factors that determine how long this takes. But I see people achieve all kinds of improvement, go from I've had students go from 145 to 165, right? Huge jumps in score. It just sometimes takes different lengths of time, and sometimes it can take a long time, but I absolutely believe that anyone can do it, right? And I like really try to live this in my teaching, that always, I've yet to work with a student where I've been like, oh no, you can't do this. Anyone can do this. It's just a matter of how much time and energy a particular score is worth to you. And that's a broad, then you have to think about what's the rest of your life, what are the schools you're applying to, what's the rest of your application look like, right? But I think, whatever your goal is, if you're willing to put in the time and effort, you absolutely can and will get to where you want to be. All right, that's my pep talk. So that's my broad overview of the test. I think another thing, just to come back to something, because I want to talk about GMAT versus GRE, this is a big difference. This is maybe the big difference between GMAT and GRE, is that GMAT is question adaptive, right? So each question you get it wrong or right, the next question is harder or easier. I personally find that very hard to deal with strategically. And one of the reasons for that is that I make a lot of small errors, right? My biggest issue, especially in quant, is rushing and making small errors. We can get into all kinds of reasons why that happens. But on GRE, because it is section by section adaptive, you can go, and I know this is a little different on GMAT now, but it's still not as good as GRE, I think. You can move around within the section. So you can say, oh, I made a mistake on question 2 and go back. And I think it's just much easier to deal with the section by section adaptation strategically. And I think that also can be very helpful if, like me, things like quant tend to, things like doing arithmetic under pressure tend to make you anxious. So I find that a lot of the students I work with who benefit from switching to GMAT to GRE are students who have some kind of past bad experience or anxiety around math, have some form of anxiety or sort of nervousness that's impacting them in general around standardized testing. GRE is also great for people who feel a little more comfortable in the verbal side compared to the quant. The big bummer, of course, of GRE verbal is the vocabulary. We're going to talk about those in a second. They are not just vocabulary questions. They are first and foremost reading questions. But yes, there is a certain amount of word acquisition that often has to happen for GRE. And that's the one place where I think GMAT has an advantage. Otherwise, I think that the GRE is a strategically more forgiving test. I also think that the math content is a little bit more forgiving. Okay, that's like the core, that's my core basics of the overall structure. Now I want to get, and it's a little bit of GRE versus GMAT. I'm going to keep touching on GRE versus GMAT as we go, but I'm now going to turn to the slides that I do have on hand to talk about what the quant side looks like in a more granular way. What are the major question types? What are the and then what is the overall section structure for section 1, section 2? Then we'll do the same thing with verbal. Again, a reminder, if at any point you have a question, something's not clear, whatever you want, let me know in the chat. Let's look at an intro to quant. So 3 different types of questions that we're going to be dealing with in quant. We're going to be dealing with comparison questions. These are ones that give us 2 quantities, maybe some upfront information, and then we always have the same 4 answer choices. These are a great place to gain some time. Why? They always ask the same thing, and that thing is always how to compare. And by focusing on the comparison, we can be more efficient. So I recommend, right, like start with these, or start with these early on. They are unique to the GRE. They are also a great question type to look at in thinking about GMAT versus GRE, right? Because GMAT has data sufficiency. This is like the GRE version of data sufficiency. I think they're easier than data sufficiency. So try some of these and see if you like them. If you do, that can be a good indicator GRE is going to be a better fit for you. Next, there is what we call discrete quant. Some people call them problem solving. These are like the more quote unquote typical math questions. Maybe 2/3 of them or so are multiple choice like this, where you have 5 questions. About a third or either choose all that apply. Anytime you see these square boxes, it says indicate all, so you can choose more than one. And some are text entry, and they will tell you with the text entry, right? Do they want an integer? Do they want a decimal? Do they want you to round? Do they want a fraction? They'll be very clear. Select all and fill in the blank are not necessarily harder, but they can be more time consuming, in part because some of the strategic tricks, like back solving from answer choices or process of elimination, can't be used on those. So if you're going to be, for many of us, we're going to want to skip a couple questions to save time. Those can be good ones to skip. Final question tape is data interpretation. These give us a graph, or in this case, a pair of graphs, a graph and a chart, and we are asked 3 questions about them. So these only occur in the first quant section. They always occur in a set of 3, and all 3 questions refer to the same graph or graphs. This is also something that's different from GMAT, right? So if you're switching from GMAT, you might also want to try some of these and see how you feel about them. If you like them, that could be a good indicator the GRE will be a better fit. All right, and finally, structure of a quant section. We are gonna first start out. So this is that first one, right? With the 12 problems, we have 21 minutes. We're gonna start with 4 quantitative comparisons. Then we're going to do 3 data interpretation, or sorry, there's like one little, I always forget about it now. There's this one little discrete quant that sneaks in there. So you do 4 comparisons, 1 other type of question. It's so weird. 3 data interpretation questions, and then you come back and you do this last 4. The mix of, one of the challenges here that we want to prepare for, right, is going to be transitioning between formats. And so something to think about as you study is continually like mix it up, right? This is when we talk about study tips, we'll come back to this maybe a little bit, but mixing topics, mixing formats, maybe not as you're just starting, but relatively soon in your studies, you want to get into that because that's what they're going to be asking you to do on the test. So that's a challenge, but a benefit is you can use the transitions to check in with time. So you can say, all right, when I get to the graphs, how much time do I want to have left on the clock, right? I'm about halfway through. So am I about halfway through? I check in with the time there. That's our first quant section. Then the second one's a little bit longer. It's 15 problems, 26 minutes, 5 quantitative comparisons, and then just a big block of 10 discrete quant. That's where I would be really careful with time, right? So we don't have those transitions to check in with time as much here. And so being really, a little bit more cognizant of that in this big stretch here is important. So that's our quant section. We will return to talk a little bit, I think, about the graph questions and the comparison questions if we have time. But I want to now run through something very similar with verbal to show you what are the verbal question types and what can we expect in each of the verbal sections. So we have 2 types of quote unquote vocabulary questions, right? Because we're given a sentence with a blank and we have to pick the word that fits. However, this is not like a fill in the blank vocab test that you would have done maybe in school. Here, it is just as much about reading as about knowing the words. So sometimes we'll get really unfamiliar kind of esoteric words in the answer choices. But sometimes we'll get much more everyday words in the answer choices. Answer choices are sometimes easy, sometimes hard. Sentences are sometimes easy, sometimes hard. So we have two skills that we need to practice here. One is sort of critical reading. And then the second is acquiring words. And I tend to put a little bit more emphasis actually on the first skill because that one is faster. So my suggestion in verbal is often to start with reading comp because the work that you do in reading comp is going to also help you with these vocabulary questions. I put it in scare quotes because they are also reading questions. So one type is this. It's called text completion. We have 1, 2, or 3 blanks, and we're picking one word to go in the blank. The second type is called sentence equivalence because we're picking 2 words. So we have 1 blank, but we're going to put 2 words in it. And we want those 2 words to match each other and to produce the same idea from the sentence. So here, for example, right, early critics of Emily Dickinson's poetry mistook for simple-mindedness the surface of artlessness that in fact she constructed with such something. So I would start here with the sentence. I'd say, okay, they mistook it for simple-mindedness, but it was actually something else. It wasn't simple. It was actually constructed with like a lot of, with such like care, or maybe with such cleverness, or maybe with such skill. So I kind of get an idea about the blank first, and then I'm going to look at my answers. I'm going to say, all right, it's not astonishment, it's not innocence, it's not naivete. To vex someone is to like anger, annoy them. It's not vexation. So it's got to be craft and cunning. Notice, right? Craft and cunning are not exact synonyms. I would not, in a conversation, use cunning interchangeably with craft. But in the context of this sentence, if I put in craft and if I put in cunning, I get the same overall idea, right? That like Emily Dickinson is actually a lot more sophisticated than the people who are reading her initially thought. Emily Dickinson's pretty great. And so I'm looking for 2 words that are close in meaning that give me the same idea from the sentence. What the directions say, but the directions are overly wordy, maybe. So those are my 2 quote unquote vocab questions. And that's always my process for these, right? I always try to start with the sentence, understand what I think should go in the blank, then I go to my answers. We then also have a lot of reading. About half the section is reading, and there are multiple different types of reading questions. I am not going to get into all of the different reading comp questions because there's a lot. Maybe if we have a little bit of time at the end, we can, but I am just going to show you how these things are distributed within the sections. So verbal section 1, 12 problems, 18 minutes. We're going to start with those text completion. Those are the pick ones. Then we're going to get a little bit of reading comp, similar to Quant, right, where we go back and forth. So some text completion, a couple reading comp, some sentence equivalents, a few more reading comp. Now that the test is shorter, one thing I've noticed, just if anyone used to work with the old test, it's more short passages now. There used to be like more long passages, but now I'm seeing more short passages on the test, I think because of this new structure. So this is the first verbal section. And then the second verbal section is very similar, but slightly different proportions, a little bit more text completion, a little bit less sentence equivalents, a lot more reading comp. That is, and the reading comp here is pretty similar to GMAT. So if you've done GMAT reading comp, it'll transfer pretty well to GRE. It's the text completion and sentence equivalents that you probably want to look at first, see how you feel about those compared to the other GMAT verbal. That would be a good place to focus. All right, so that's my overview of question types. That's a fair amount of GRE versus GMAT. I can get, maybe I'll come up with some other things as we keep going. If you have specific questions about it, let me know. Now I want to get into some things about study planning and time. And we have 2 different timelines. We have just starting And we, what to do if you were just starting out, and then in particular, what to do if you are studying full time. So for folks who are just starting. And this is also going to apply if you're studying full time, but I'm going to add a couple specific tips for studying full time at the end. I've been talking so much today. I'm so sorry that my voice is going a little. I may have to have a cough drop, but hopefully I won't put you through that. If you are just starting, number one, consistency is more important than like super intensity. This is a saying from like a gymnastics coach that's really stuck in my mind. Consistency is more important than intensity, right? What this means, you want to be touching the GRE 5 to 6 days in a week. That is going to be a really good thing, right? So you really want to be hitting this consistency. What I have found tends to not bring people joy are marathon weekend sessions. Like 4, 5, 6 hours. It takes time to build a new habit, right? So if you're just starting and you're like, oh, how do I integrate this new kind of chore into what's probably already a really busy life? Start small. Maybe even in your first week, say you're going to do even just 15 to 20 minutes a day. And if you can do that consistently for a week, then do 30, then do 45, right? Like work up. And then also pick a time that is easy to defend. Like I'm probably not going to try to do my studying on like Friday right after work because that's a time that I'm just, I'm going to use that time to do something fun, right? So a lot of folks find that getting up a little bit earlier in the morning, if that's viable for you, is one of the best ways to ensure you get that time in. But looking for time in your day that's otherwise tends not to be used, or maybe some people will like stay at their place of work if they can for like an extra half hour, 60 minutes at the end of their workday, because then, when they go home, you get the idea. And then a couple concrete things, right? Like take a practice test right away, even and especially if you were like, I am totally unprepared for this. I haven't done math in years. Just find out, just find out what it's like, break the ice on it, give yourself a baseline to track future progress. That's maybe how will you know you improve if you don't know where you're starting? Also, knowing where you're starting may help you with your timeline, right? How far away are you from where you want to be? So that's also a really important tip, just starting out. And then finally, be patient in building foundations. And so this means untimed. Maybe for a while, maybe for a few weeks, maybe for 6 weeks, maybe for 8 weeks. Untimed. Good, good process. You have to be able to do things smoothly and accurately. We're going to start touching onto the speed stuff too. Do things smoothly and accurately before you can do them fast. And I think one of the things that gets people into trouble with speed is that they try to do things fast right away. And that tends to create a lot of bad habits that can be kind of counterproductive. Don't stress about it, just see what happens. That's a great question. You probably won't, like most people don't. Most people have a lot of timing issues on that first test. So it is absolutely fine to go into that first test with the mindset, like it's going to be a mess. It's going to maybe be a disaster. And that's totally okay. Do what you can in the time. And then one of the best things that you can do is just try to practice letting things go too, right? So I think a good goal for your first practice test is to just try to see all of the questions, try to click through all of the 12 or 15 questions in a section. Try not to get overcommitted to like a single question midsection, and then just see, the timing will probably be a little messy, but in general, almost everyone, I'd say like 9 out of 10 people that I work with benefit from bailing sooner on a couple of problems. One of the best ways to fix your timing issues is to do less and be more accurate on what you do choose to do. This is something that is not easy. It takes a lot of practice to be able to choose what to let go of and when, and to balance this. This is something everyone will practice to get good at, but it's one of the best ways to fix timing issues, and something probably everyone would benefit from spending a little bit of time with. It's a really good question. Thank you. Do things untimed, and then especially in quant, mechanics first, right? So if you haven't done math in a while, if you hated math in school, I hated math in school, so you can have had terrible math experiences in the past and do great at GRE math, right? But be patient with yourself to just get those foundations back. So you may just start with a lot of like drills and flashcards, and maybe watching like videos or reading just to get reacquainted, and just give yourself some time and space to let those fundamentals come back. Then worry more about the GRE problem solving side. That's another reason to take this practice test, right? Is to sort of diagnose, do I know the math, but I'm having trouble with the problems? Do I need to relearn some of the math? Did I see a lot of vocabulary words I didn't know, or was it more the sentences? So the other reason to take a practice test right away is it'll help you figure out some prioritization stuff in your study. So these are my thoughts for people who are just starting out. And I want to say one more thing about the importance of consistency over intensity. Really quickly, this is like one of my favorite pieces of learning science, right? I'm going to do it real fast. But we forget things really fast. Our brains are designed to forget most of what we do. So in a given day, you could spend 7 hours becoming an absolute master of everything to do with circles. And 3 days later, you could sit down and, only be able to do 30% of the circle problems, because that is how your brain is designed. To offset that, we need multiple reviews over increasing intervals of time, because each time we review something, we're essentially saying to our brains, this is important. Let's not forget this so quickly. Right? We want to remember the important things, like which mushroom is going to poison us, and we don't remember the unimportant things, like, what are the names of these 7 kinds of edible mushrooms? But when we continue to repeat over time, we teach ourselves not to forget. 5 times. We need to see things on average 5 times over increasing intervals of time to really remember them. So this is also why I tell you to be patient with yourself starting out, or even mid-studying. I see a lot of folks come and they're like, oh, I'm forgetting everything. And it's like, well, yeah, it's just part of learning. Getting's part of learning. And it takes some time. It's true if you're learning math facts, vocab questions, any kind of skill. That 5 repetition over time really works. If you want to check out something called the Lightner box, that's a technique that uses this science to create a memorization strategy. It's great for learning vocab. A couple specific tips for folks who are full-time. I think a really great structure for full-time is 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and then maybe like 30 minutes of flashcard work, something lighter. I think you could even do an hour and a half, right? But I think a danger with being full-time is just to sort of let this task consume all, like I'm going to do 8 hours a day. And it's just not productive. I don't think anyone's brain, especially with this, like learning is hard. It takes a lot of energy. So set clear boundaries for your time. And stick with them. And then outside of the time, really like rest, ease, enjoy. Because that's gonna allow, so it's like 4 to 4.5 hours max when you are very, very present. And I would do it in 2 blocks. I'd probably do an hour, 15-minute break, another hour, come back later in the day, hour, 15-minute break, another hour. The advantage of doing it like this is then you sort of also get 2 repetitions in a day instead of a single block. And then take good care of yourself so that you can really show up for this and maximize the value of this. I find that a danger is that, trying to do 8 hours a day really becomes counterproductive for almost everyone. There's always an exception, right? But for almost everyone. I had a student who did like 12 to 15 hours a day for 2 weeks and was actually really successful, but I wouldn't want to live those 2 weeks. More power to them. So I think that's really important with full time. I would take one day off in a week, and I would sort of think in like I would try to structure in like 2 week blocks. So you might say here's what I would do. I would do 1 month of foundations, depending on what foundations you need, right? Then I would take a practice test and then use that to kind of assess and set new goals. And then after that, I would take a practice test every 1 to 2 weeks. Full time, maybe more toward every week. Folks who are not full time studying, practice is probably more like every 2 to 3 weeks. So those are some specific thoughts for that situation. All right. And now I don't have a ton of time for the last thing that I wanted to do, which was how to get faster in quant in general and in data interpretation. But I do have a couple thoughts, and we may not get into specific problems, but I do have a couple good thoughts specifically with those formats about how to get faster. So last component, how to get faster in quant. Yeah, I don't want to type. I'm really liking the handwriting, so I'm going to keep up with that. That has been good for my brain today. When you try to read things off screens, everyone tries to read too fast and they don't comprehend as well. So also as you're studying, work off of paper as much as you can. You'll retain things better. And then when you're doing the reading in particular on this test, you need to read a little slower than you want to. That's a huge, just having people read a little slower than they want to, I've seen produce such great results in reading competent verbal scores. It's super interesting. So how to get faster in quant in general, and then specifically in QC and DI. 1, first, fluid and accurate. Then, once you can do that, is there a faster path? Maybe you did a bunch of arithmetic, but you could actually, maybe you did a bunch of algebra, but you could actually test numbers, right? So is there an alternate method? Does it work for you? Sometimes the like trick solution, the like shortcut solution, I find so mentally taxing. It makes more sense for me to do the like slower solution. And then written work. Is your written work clear, organized? That also really supports efficient problem solving. So first, can you do it? Then I would evaluate these things. What else helps with speed? To follow a process, which I will talk about for both of these question types. that is consistent and clear, and to make sure that your mechanics are really good. You know, like, is your arithmetic fluid and fast and comfortable? Is your algebra fluid and fast, right? Like, I think sometimes we can get so focused on this aspect of speed, like what's the fast, tricky strategy, that we leave this low-hanging fruit behind. And then the other low-hanging fruit in terms of speed is get faster at stuff you're good at. It's so much easier to improve speed on something that you're already good at doing than to focus on like those questions that take you 4 minutes and are really taxing and awful. A certain percentage of those you're just going to choose not to do too, right? That's always this other component of improving in time, making individual questions faster, but then also making good strategic choices about which questions to commit to. So these are some of the core like principles to have in mind as you're working with speed. Process. Follow a process. Always, right? There's so many benefits to having a consistent process for each question type. And for folks just starting out with the problem solving side of it, follow a consistent process. So for data interpretation, first, read the graph. Get really clear on the graph. Take your time. And this actually, I'm going to put it back on this side. One of the, maybe the most important thing is slower at the start, faster overall. One of the biggest ways that I see timing issues get bad is when folks rush to get to the algebra or the arithmetic part of the problem, when in fact, often it is the information processing setup and decision-making part of the problem at the beginning that's where the opportunities for efficiency are. So be slow in your reading, in your organizing of information on your paper, and all those stages. Then the mechanics part will go fast. Trust in that. But slower at the start is good. So take your time, read the graph or graphs. What is the title? What are the labels? What are the axes? Can you pick one point and explain it? Don't, you're going to be stuck with this for 3 questions. So don't skimp on this. 2, read the question. What is the topic? What is the sort of formula for that topic? Can you write down your goal? I'll explain that in a second. And then, only then, do you find the info and solve. So for example, just to give one example of what I mean by writing down the goal, right, which is also super important in word problems. Let's say I had a question that asked me like, what percentage of dogs like cheese? I think it's probably 100%, but for the purposes of this, my thought process for something like this, and remember, a real data interpretation question will be like a big block of text, not short, but my process for any question is like, okay, it's percent. So I know I'm going to need a part over whole. My part is going to be dogs that like cheese. My whole is going to be all dogs. And I write down at least this last part on my paper so that I then have this really clear template or framework that will help me go back and pick information out of the graph, do my math, and then make sure I've solved for the right thing at the end. I do this also for like long word problems, but especially for graph problems, really being patient in breaking down the graph and the question, enormously helpful. So happy to hear it, Chanel. Thank you. I have one last thing about QC process, then I'm going to let us all go. I'm on the East Coast, and I know some folks are, in time zones where it's probably very late or very early for you. Appreciate you being here. QC process, right? Always, what is the upfront info? Can I simplify? I always go in this order, top down. What are the quantities? Like I state to myself, what am I comparing? And I try to simplify the quantities. There's a bunch of different techniques you can probably find information about online for simplifying. Then and only then do I get into picking numbers. A big issue with speed and QC is people go straight into testing numbers. But a lot of times we don't need that. And if you take time to simplify the upfront information and the quantities first, if you do test numbers, it'll be more efficient, or you may find that you don't need to test numbers. All right. Thank you all so much. That is our time for today. I'm sorry we didn't get to look at some specific problems. I think next month I'm going to do like a more structured lesson around timing and how to work on timing and do time sets and all of that. So I'll be back. I'll be back in August with a maybe more organized lesson on timing. And I also have a colleague, one of my colleagues does another one of these each month. So come back. You can also come to the first session of any of our full courses for free. It's going to be 3 hours. It'll get way more deep into some of the structure stuff, some of the strategy stuff. So check it out. It's free. I hope you all have a great night. Mariah, good luck on Saturday. For everyone else, I hope that you get to your goal score as soon as possible and never have to think about the GRE again. It's always my dream for all of us. Yeah, it's always, that's a great question, Trista. It's always the same core syllabus. So you'll have the same homework, same materials, same rough outline of the class. Each of us is a little different. We have different styles. We'll emphasize different things. But it's roughly the same thing each time. Yay. Thank you all. Have a great night.